Good morning. It is a privilege to be here this morning, and it's really nice to see familiar faces, even though we're all wearing masks, except for us right now. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and hello to those of you online as well. It's a great honor to be able to share with you what God has been doing in our lives through our family and through our work with CBM, and even in sharing with you the reason for why we're here this morning. So for those of you that don't know, we took a repatriation flight in April to return to Canada. We received an email from the embassy telling all Canadians, they strongly encouraged all Canadians to leave. And so at that time, we didn't know whether we really wanted to leave. We really didn't know when that would be, what that would take for us as a family. And so we really prayed about it and sent them our demographic information, told them where we were. And they were choosing 5 locations to have sweeper flights to sweep to the main island, just like you sweep a broom, sweeping us to the main island, and then we would depart from that main island to Toronto, and Toronto to wherever we needed to go. And so we decided to send them our information because we knew we were coming home in June for our home assignment. And so our island was chosen. So we drove 3 hours to the airport. We were at multiple checkpoints, had to be masked. At that point, we were in lockdown already for 6 weeks. So the kids and I had actually not been out of the house for 6 weeks. We weren't allowed. Only one person was allowed out of the home. All the work we were doing with our ministry partners was the same way that we are working with them now. Was through email, through Zoom, and that we weren't allowed to be out on the streets. For those of you that don't know, the Philippines is in Asia. I guess the next slide I'll share with you as I'm kind of sharing a little bit about our kids as well. But CBM, for one, works in 18 countries in the world, Philippines being one of those countries. But the Philippines is 7,500 islands. Only 2,000 of those 7,500 islands are inhabited. And so we live on one of those 2,000 islands, not the main island, which is where we lived for 2 years, but an island, a 45-minute domestic flight off of that island. And so this is the region in Capiz where we live. And so we live in a city about the size of Sussex, population double of St. John. We're the only foreign family in the city. So when we get out of our vehicles, you can only imagine what they do when they see blonde-haired, blue-eyed, 18-year-old daughter, almost, and our 6'1" son, who's also blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and then our other 2 kids as well. Well, white skin is a rarity over there, right? White skin is loved over there, and so we're very different, and so it's very challenging at times. So we always have that cultural stress when we're going places too, to make sure we're safe. We live in a gated community, so we always have to be careful where we go and where we allow our kids to go and all of that. And so that's always a stress that's on our shoulders. So when we were given this opportunity to leave in the middle of a pandemic, we kind of thought, the whole world is living under this whole pandemic stress. At least if we were to go home to Canada, to New Brunswick, where for us is our normal, we would at least have the cultural stress lifted off our shoulders. And so we took that opportunity. So in doing that, I packed the lightest I've ever packed. In all the times I've come home over the last 4 years, the lightest I packed, naively thinking that when our home assignment was done, the end of September, we would return. But the reality is, right now, foreigners are actually not allowed back in the country. The country, especially the main island, which we would first fly into, is completely under lockdown still. And it's not safe. We have friends, we have colleagues that have been COVID positive, we have colleagues that have been part of the, they've had to go into lockdown because they've had, they've been, what's the word, they're quarantined because they've been with a person that's been COVID positive, so they've had to make sure that they're fine. And so we've had a lot of that going on within our ministry. So we knew, I think for Michael and I, if it was just the 2 of us, we might have made a different choice. But we had our kids to think about, and it was already stressful enough for all of us, so that's the decision we made as a family. We're grateful. We're grateful to be home. We're grateful to be able to continually minister with our partners through the wonderful way of communication through Zooming and emailing and FaceTiming and all of that. we're still in constant communication with them. Our kids were homeschooled on that island, and so for 2 years, it was good, and they're at the good educationally, but socially they didn't have a lot of friends, and so that was challenging for us. And so when we came home, first of all, we had Kyla come to us and say, you know, I kind of want to have a normal grade 12 year. I kind of want to graduate from Belle Isle, the school I spent the first 7 years of my life in. And she's really quiet, and she doesn't usually have a major voice, and so we kind of took that as, you know, we really should assess this and look at the whole thing. And so she's playing soccer, a sport that she played at varsity level when she was in Manila, and loving it. She loves the outdoors. She's doing art, because she had all of her credits that she needed to graduate, all of the main ones, and she's loving every minute of it. Our boys too. Initially, they were on the fence, and then they made a decision to go back, and they're also loving it, and they've reconnected with old friends that they had, and they used their summer money to buy themselves a dirt bike to share, and now they've got some buddies that they're hanging out with, and so it's been kind of fun that way for our kids. Our youngest, Allie, she has decided to stay home, and she's home with us still, and I'm grateful for that, because I really miss our kids. We were used to the 6 of us just always being together, and I really knew that I would miss them if they all went. So gratefully, Allie has chosen to stay home, and I still work with her, doing all of her subjects, and so right now we're home, and we're home indefinitely at this point. It's not safe to go back, we're not allowed to go back, and so right now it's kind of like we've got 2 feet in both worlds. You know, we're here, but we've got a lot over there, including all of our pets. They're there being taken care of, but all of our belongings are over there, and so we're kind of back and forth like this. One day we wake up thinking we need to make a change in our lives and move completely home, you know, full time. The next day, which will probably be after this presentation, we'll be like, we need to get on the next plane to go back, even though we're not allowed to go back. We just go back and forth and back and forth, and so you can pray for that, for peace in our hearts around this whole time. It's very uncertain for us. And so that's a little bit about, that's just a little bit about us, and obviously if you have any questions, feel free to ask us. Mike's going to share CBM's work, what the 5 focuses of CBM's work, before we go into what our work is.
Yes, as Melanie said, I'm just going to share just quickly about Canadian Baptist Ministries. I'm sure that you all are probably familiar with Canadian Baptist Ministries, but one of the things that we like to do when we're making presentations like this is just to give just a quick overview of what helps or what guides CBM's work internationally. And so, as Melanie said, there's 5 sort of key areas, what we call our organizational ends, but they really are just the things that help guide us. And so we have partners all over the world who come to us with great needs and great opportunities for us to get involved, but we use these 5 key areas to help us know what to say yes to, where to get involved, and what to help out with, and what to say, you know what, those are really great things, but we just can't get involved because they're not part of our focus, and there's other organizations who focus in those areas. So the first one of them is, you can go to it, is poverty. And, you know, obviously there's poverty all over the world. We have seen poverty in the Philippines like we've never seen before. And so, you know, as people of God, as the church, we are called to help alleviate poverty. Poverty, of course, we often think is just about a lack of stuff, right? You know, we can answer poverty, we can help poverty just by providing stuff. And really, that's not what poverty is about. Poverty is about oftentimes broken systems, broken relationships that just keep people in a state of poverty in a cycle, you know. And so, really, it's a challenging work. But it's a very important work that Canadian Baptist Ministries does with partners around the world. The second focus that we have is in the area of justice. Justice, again, is very challenging work. I can think of one of our colleagues, Gato, who works in DR Congo and Rwanda, and just really works in the area of justice and getting particularly Indigenous people who are, you know, often not given the rights that they should have as people, the dignity that they should have. All humanity should have dignity, and there should be equality among all people. And so CBM works with our partners around the world in the area of justice and standing up for people's rights. The third one is Kids at Risk, and this is one that Melanie and I have been quite involved in with our work in the Philippines, because our partner has a child care ministry for early childhood education, and these are centers, and Melanie will share a little bit more about that in a bit, but they're centers that are in very poor communities where children don't have access to early childhood education, don't have the ability to, not the ability, but don't have opportunities to learn about things like nutrition and hygiene and those kinds of things. And kids, all around the world, including here in Canada, are often put at risk at no fault of their own. And so as the church and as CBM, we work together to protect kids at risk and to just to defend them. The fourth one is building the church. And for Canadian Baptist Ministries, since really its inception, this has been key to who we are as an organization. CBM believes wholeheartedly in working in partnership with local churches around the world, meaning that we don't just sort of say, I think this would be a good place to go, this particular country or community in the world. I think we'll just send people there and start working. We don't do that. We only work by invitation of local church partners, and we foster partnerships with them. And so when we talk about building the church, that's a big part of CBM's work is partnering with local church organizations, local churches at this level or at the denominational level, and to provide things like training, whether it's in seminaries or informal setting, in workshops or these types of things, and doing pastoral leadership training, lay leadership training, all of these types of things to help churches to grow their ministry and grow the impact that they can have in their own communities. We firmly believe that the local churches in the Philippines, for example, have a far better chance or opportunity to impact their communities than we would as foreigners coming into their communities. And so really it's a capacity building ministry, one that we stand behind and cheer them on, and to see them embrace love and banish fears of people in their communities. And the final one that guides CBM's work is in the area of crisis response. And this we see, it comes out of nowhere sometimes, right? Where tsunami strikes in a place like Indonesia, or a typhoon hits a place like our province in Capiz in the Philippines, or famine or drought strikes in somewhere in Africa, or the list goes on and on and on. Disasters happen all the time, and of course the most recent one that we would all be aware of is the COVID-19 pandemic. It is a crisis around the world in a scale like we've hardly ever seen before. Certainly as a generation we have not. And so CBM with our partners are constantly responding to these requests of our partners to help out in times of need, to respond to disasters, to crisis, to calamities that happen. Oftentimes providing short-term things like food relief. When disaster strikes, oftentimes people who are day workers, they don't have the means to be able to provide food for their families if they can't work that particular day. And if the disaster keeps them from working, then they don't have food. And so providing food is an essential thing. But rehabilitating homes and livelihoods is also a big part of it. And just to help our partners to do that work in their community and respond to those crises as they arise. I'm just going to quickly mention our partner in the Philippines, and then I'm going to let Melanie come back and she'll share specifically about some of the projects and programming that we've been a part of over the last 4 years. So as I mentioned a minute ago, Canadian Baptist Ministries works exclusively in partnership with local Baptist churches and denominations or faith groups around the world. In the Philippines, when we went 4 years ago, we did not have an official partner. So I said earlier that CBM only works by invitation and by partnership. So that was true. We were invited by KPM, we say KPM, but Kabuganaan Philippine Ministries. We were invited them to come and to partner with them, but we had no formal partnership agreement yet. And so January of 2019, so like almost 2 years ago, this picture that you're seeing is actually the official signing of the partnership agreement that we made between CBM and KPM. And if you just click the next slide, you'll see Reverend Hope and Phoebe Santiago are the directors, or they call themselves administrators, but of KPM. They are a wonderful couple. They are so gifted and so passionate about the work that they do and just the people that they serve. We have grown to love them. They are mentors to us. They are like our Filipino parents. They're our grandparents to our children. We talk to them almost on a daily basis and have since we've returned in October. In many times it's just to chat and just to see how each other's doing. Other times it's just to sometimes cry together when they're sharing things that are difficult. It's to pray with them. It's to just to be there as a support to them. And then other times it's to work and to see how we can respond and how we can continue to press the work forward in the midst of this pandemic that sees us tens of thousands of miles apart from each other. But that is our partner, and so Melanie's going to come back now and she's going to explain just a kind of an overview of some of the work that we've been involved in with KPM, and then I'll come back up and sort of wrap things up at the end.
So first area of ministry would be within childcare centers. So there are 5. One is in an urban poor area that's about 7 minutes or so from our home. They have no water, no sanitation. It's basically an area that's urban poor. Another area, there's 2 in the mountains, Aglanon and Hopevale, and that's a very indigenous area where it takes quite a long period of time to travel there. We have gone to both, go by motorcycle up into the hills. And then another one is where our ministry first began, which is it's in Lucero area, and actually our kids have a few friends in that area. And 20 years ago, that's where there was a church, Kipling Avenue Baptist Church, and they began some ministry within that area. And then the 5th one is a new one that's also very close to our home in Nipa area. And so the childcare centers are run by 5 missionary teachers. And right now, within the COVID restrictions, the 5 of them got together and they put their minds together and decided to create modules for the kids. And so the modules will be picked up by the parents, of course, abiding by social distancing rules, and these modules will be taken home to these families, and the families will organize and teach the work within the module work. So it's a little bit challenging because a lot of these kids come from very, very poor families, and moms may be home sometimes, dad not, and so there's going to be some challenges for sure, but it's the best that they can do amongst COVID restrictions. And within these childcare centers, they're taught English, they're taught how to take care of themselves, how to brush their teeth, how to wash their hair, how to just language things. They're taught how to read, they're taught about animals, and within the Philippines, English is taught in the school systems, if you were not aware of that. Anyone that's about 40 and under knows pretty good English, because back many years ago, they brought that in with the government and they were taught English. So it's easy to communicate to people that are within that age bracket. It's still a little limited, but it's still fairly good. So that has been taught within the childcare centers. And as you can see, awful cute little faces to look at. Another ministry is our student ministry, which is a Pavia scholarship program. So these youth are brought into this program by if there's a need within their family, if they have a drive or a desire to go to college or university, if they are, if they're within the region where Capiz, within the 52 Baptist churches, they apply to it, and then they receive scholarship money. And so this student discipleship program, so this is a ministry that happens, they get together as a group, all of them that have had these scholarships, and it's like a discipleship time, and they share their stories, they share their experiences, they share their desires, their dreams together, they pray together, they encourage each other, they share a meal together. And so we've been a part of being able to listen to their testimonies and listen to their stories and journey with them through that as well. So with COVID restrictions, that has also changed for them, but thank goodness for Zoom, and thank goodness that in some of the areas the service is pretty good, so they've met by Zoom as discipleship groups. And actually all the colleges and universities aren't actually back and running. They're not like us where we're able to actually go back and socially distance. This is Asia, so it's very challenging to keep that social distance because there's a lot of kids within each school, and so they actually do all of their work by Zoom right now, or their module work. The next area of work is the CCTEP. So they really love acronyms. The CCTEP stands for Capiz Continued Theological Education, and so program. So this is a 3-year program, and it's made up of a group of pastors who it's like a lot of practical theology work. So they're taught things like how to make a church budget. They're all pastors, so how to make a church budget, how to minister to with grief and loss, pastoral care and counseling. I actually had the privilege of, for those of you who don't know, I'm a trained counselor, so I had the privilege of meeting and teaching and co-leading that course. That actually happened 3 or 4 days right before lockdown happened. And so what a blessing to be able to have that opportunity to teach that program to the pastors, to take it back to their churches, to help their churches better deal with stress and anxiety. And so it was a real privilege to be a part of that. So that's one of the classes that I was a part of teaching. And Phoebe, she's also a trained guidance counselor. She helps with language barriers and that sort of thing to help talk through the psychology pieces that are a little bit heavy for them to learn within their second language. And so this is a wonderful group of men and women that have applied to be a part of this program. And when currently things have kind of slowed down, of course, with COVID, but they did have a Zoom class in July that was taught, and they have one finishing out this year that they're actually doing, but they're working in cohorts. So they're going to go to a place where they have really good service, and as a cohort they're going to be like a bubble, and they're going to work through their final class together for this year. And then there's one more year of this program as well. So it's been a privilege to be a part of that and to get to know each of the pastors on a more personal level as well. And so that's one of the programs that we're a part of as well. And then the next one is IYLG, so another acronym. So this is a Christian and Muslim program. So this is where our pastors, our Capiz pastors, have met with Muslim communities within the southern part of the Philippines, and they have also come to our region. It's an engagement around life, culture, faith, getting to know one another on a personal level, so that they live out the Muslim culture, but within themselves they have a personal faith. And so it's been really an awesome experience for them to build relationships with them and to get to know them, knowing that they have Muslim culture is a part of their life, but they do have a personal faith as well. And so having that sort of conversation back and forth, that's being revisioned because of COVID, because there's some travel involved in that, because that's the southern part of the Philippines. So having to look at how they're going to revision and change this program is in the works, I guess is the best way to say. So this is that's the next, and then I think that you're next, are you not? Oh, disaster relief. So disaster relief, this past Christmas, we actually were hit with a typhoon. You would have heard it as Fanfon, just Fanfon? Yeah, sorry. But for us, it's Typhoon Ursula. And so it struck in our region. We always go away for Christmas. Christmas is really hard for us, being away from our family. So we just leave and we go somewhere where we can get together, the 6 of us as a family, and just we change up white snow for white sand and just go somewhere as a family, because it's really hard on our hearts. We're a close family, and so to be away from them is challenging. So where we were staying was hit, but also our home was hit. So the eye hit in 5 different locations. And so Michael traveled back on Boxing Day to make sure our home was okay, because we lost power and everything. And so natural disasters, calamities like that, are very much a part of what goes on in the Philippines. It's actually one of the countries in the world that are hit with natural calamities the most: earthquakes, typhoons. And so we were just rebuilding. The country was just rebuilding from Ursula, because that was in December. Actually, we had just distributed rice, which rice is life in the Philippines. So we had just distributed rice out to the communities with one of our projects. And then COVID-19 struck. And so when Ursula went through, a lot of loss of jobs, a lot of loss of work for families. They're day-to-day workers in the Philippines. I don't know if you're aware of that or even what that means. But that might mean, say I had a heart disease and needed medication for that, I would go every day to the pharmacy to get my heart pills. I don't get a little jar of them, it's too expensive. I would go every day to get my heart pill. So if I'm not working that day, I don't get my heart pill, or I don't get food for my family, or I don't, like that's how they work in the Philippines. And so when Ursula struck, and like trike drivers and all of the guys that would have these day-to-day jobs that would drive people around, or when tourism was hit, because a lot of people work within tourism as well, then they didn't have any money for their families. And so they were just beginning to rebuild. Rooftops were just beginning to be put back on homes that were the rooftops were blown off of. And then the whole country went into lockdown, and they weren't allowed to even be out of their homes, so they weren't allowed, the trike drivers weren't working either. So we actually had a young fella say to us before we left, it's actually not COVID-19 we're the most scared about. It's actually starvation we're terrified for, because we don't have the money. If we can't work, we can't eat. And so that's a prayer that we have for the people of the Philippines, is that they would be able to rebuild, because the reality is they're hungry. And these islands, 2,000 islands inhabited, to have food taken to all of these islands is very, very challenging. And so some of the islands would be affected for sure as well. The main island might be okay, but the other islands, it's been very challenging for them. So our prayers for the people of the Philippines would be greatly appreciated in these days.
Yeah, and just before I go on to the next part, I'll just add to what Melanie was just talking about. We were talking with our partners with Hope and Phoebe just last week, and I made a comment about the death rate around COVID-19 cases in the Philippines, and he said, yes, the deaths are certainly happening, but he said, actually, there are more people in the Philippines dying right now of other health issues because they can't get medical care. So in the Philippines, and many countries are like this, but they have a hospital system that has essentially been pushed to its capacity, and in many cases exceeded it with COVID cases. And if COVID cases start to spread in the hospitals, then they immediately say, no, we're not taking any more patients. And so that happened almost nationwide. And so people who had other critical health issues, who needed medical care, couldn't get it, and they just had to stay home, and many of them died from those kinds of things, which is tragic and heartbreaking, and just really speaks to the magnitude of this COVID crisis. It's much larger and much more impactful than just what we see in the media, right? They report certainly, new cases or recoveries or deaths related to COVID, but it's not telling the whole story. And so we certainly do need to be praying for our partners in the Philippines as they deal with it, but also just our people around the world. So I just want to wrap up here quickly. I know we've shared a lot, and we're going fast, so I apologize about that, but we just wanted to give a good overview. But the final thing I want to share about is one of the key areas that we've been engaged in is in an area called Faith and Work initiatives. Faith and Work, you may have heard this before. You may have heard it called marketplace ministry or something like that. But really what we're talking about is the integration of Christian faith with our work that we do in the world. And that work doesn't necessarily have to be paid work. It can be voluntary work. It can be domestic work. It can be volunteer work, whatever, right? And so, but it's really talking about how is it that we can integrate the Christian faith that we have and into the work that we're doing outside the walls of the church. And so that's been a big part of our work. And we have a couple of specific projects, or I don't actually like to use the word projects because they're actually business initiatives. These are sustainable businesses that have been established by our partner KPM for the purpose of really trying to raise the quality of livelihood among the poor farmers and other people within these communities. And so the first one I want to just quickly overview is this one called Food for Life. And Food for Life, as the title would suggest, is really about food. It's about agriculture. It's about strengthening farmer livelihoods through quality inputs, farm inputs, through training in organic and integrated farming practices, and by establishing equitable markets and advertising and sales channels and all of those types of things. Food for Life began in 2017 really as an idea to help poor farmers in Capiz province who were continually getting stuck in these cycles of debt. They would need to have farm seeds and fertilizers and these things, but they had no money. And these wealthy traders would say, oh, well, we'll give you all of this stuff, and then when you harvest, you just pay us back. But the interest rates were exorbitant interest rates. They were really exploiting them. But the farmers, having no other options, were making these deals. Then when their harvest wasn't good enough, they were then indebted to these traders at really high interest rates, and then they would go borrow from another